So in any event, our view here is that socialism is about goals, not methods. State socialism is one way, a very bad way, of reaching those goals. As anarchists, we strongly oppose that state socialist model, but a genuinely freed market, not a, quote, free market where that gets used as an excuse for all kinds of situations that really aren't free. People regularly talk about what we have today as a free market, despite the enormous intervention of the government in propping up failing industries, providing tariff support, intellectual property protections that ensure monopoly profits are reaped by a variety of folks in the economy, all kinds of violent and restrictive regulations on the part of the state. That's not a free market. That's why we talk about a freed market, a market that's genuinely liberated from those intrusions by the state. A freed market offers another way of reaching genuinely socialist goals. Right now, we've got an economy which is shot through with privilege of all kinds. And so if you want to free the markets, if you want to liberate people to be productive market participants in a way that will not make them subject to bosses, that will not make them subject to poverty, then you've got to eliminate privilege. Eliminate the privileges that give people monopoly profits, that give them subsidies that in one way or another enable them to exploit their political connections, as big businesses of all kinds do, at the expense of the public, at the expense of all of us. So if you eliminate those kinds of privileges, you can ensure a number of things. So you can make it more likely that people who want to do so will be able to work in cooperatives or partnerships or to work for themselves. You can make it more likely that organizations will be smaller and that power will be devolved naturally to lower levels. You can make sure that the price of an item will be more likely to tend toward the price of the labor required to produce it. To the extent that that's not the case, we can be suspicious that one sort of market distortion or another is happening. Capitalization requirements will be lower, so more people will find it easier to thumb their noses at organizations that don't treat them well, something that will put enormous pressure on organizations to treat people better. State policies that make and keep people poor by upholding privileges for various favored groups will no longer be in place. We can talk about that at enormous length, but think about things like licensing requirements that keep people from performing certain kinds of jobs, or zoning requirements and building codes that keep people from locating their work in particular places, say working out of their homes. All of these things tend to make and keep people poor. Getting rid of the privileges involved there can make a huge difference. Now, given the definition I've offered, this is clearly a socialist program. That is, it's a program designed to empower workers and to reduce deprivation. But it is not a program that involves enforcing a particular pattern of ownership, much less about empowering the state to run the economy. It's about achieving socialist ends through voluntary cooperative means, through market means. So that's why, as I say, Tucker could simultaneously embrace markets with both hands and identify himself as a socialist who joined the First International. So this is all a big aside. The Tannehills take it for granted that when we talk about socialism, we're talking about the state running the economy. And if that's what you're talking about, I'm against it. So is everybody at C4SS. But if, on the other hand, you're talking about eliminating bossism and deprivation, we're all for it, and we think that can happen in the market. Okay? The Tannehills offer some examples of why a violent, non-cooperative approach to managing economic relationships isn't very likely to work well. And they're surely right about this. Obviously, such an approach can work well for you personally if you're a thug, right? If you want to put a gun to somebody's head and make that person your slave or take that person's stuff, hey, you know, that's great for you, at least in the short term. But if your goal is really to see everyone better off, then there's no better approach than letting people plan and coordinate and cooperate in the way that makes the most sense to them, okay? They've got information. Ordinary people, every single actor in the economy has information about people's needs and interests that central planners simply don't have. I know more about myself. I know more about my situation and about what I'm interested in, about what my capacities are, my strengths are, my needs are, my interests are, than anybody watching this video, and certainly more than somebody sitting in front of a computer running numbers in a bureaucratic central planning office. And in addition, people convey, and indeed I think it would be fair to say they create, invaluable information about their priorities when they offer or accept particular prices. And so those prices convey all sorts of information to actors throughout the economy that enable them, even when they don't know each other at all, to coordinate their actions and work together to set production levels and plan distribution patterns that are going to work for people. Okay? Now, that's not to say that any individual actor in the economy is anything close to infallible. There are all kinds of problems you run into there, and people can screw up, and people can be inclined to engage in morally repugnant behavior, etc., etc. But the fact remains that there is more information available to ordinary people coordinating their activities through prices than there is to people at the top level of the economy trying to coordinate things using mathematical models. Okay? Now, all of that just assumes, of course, that central planners whose inabilities to perform properly I've been highlighting, that central planners really are people who mean well and that they're at work simply trying to make things happen as they should. Now, if that were the case, the central planners still couldn't do the job right. As I've just suggested, they lack the information that's out there distributed throughout the economy. But I think it's really important to recognize that these are people with their own personal and political agendas. They're not simply people who arrive in the morning with pure motives and try to get good things done. I'm not saying that they're all evil. I'm not saying that they're all venal. I am saying that they don't check their identities at the door when they head into the office. Okay? And so, furthermore, it's important to recognize that when you're talking about the top levels of political hierarchies in any state, the kinds of people who become able to exercise power over others are more likely than not to be people who like to exercise power over others. Okay? That is to say, if you're exercising power in an institution, in a society, here's my guess. You were not randomly selected. Okay? Your name wasn't picked out of the phone book. Instead, you were somebody who had to work hard to acquire your power. You were somebody who had to be ambitious. You were somebody who had to think that that ambition was worthwhile because you could get something in the end, like the opportunity to exercise power over others. So this is a group of folks who have been selected for their interest in power. Now, if that's the case, what are the odds that they're going to be able to exercise that power in a way that is purely benevolent? Ask yourself that question. So, in any event, the Tannehills talk, I think, quite plausibly about the superiority of the distributed decision-making that occurs in a decentralized, bottom-up, cooperative economy, the superiority of that kind of decision-making over top-down decision-making. I think, however, that they unnecessarily complicate the story they tell when they say that market actors act in their own self-interest. Okay? I think this is a wild oversimplification, which is just not supported by the evidence. Now, market actors certainly act to achieve their goals. Okay? Market actors are interested in achieving those goals, in efficient manners. Okay? Now, sometimes those goals are self-interested. Sometimes they're not. As I suggested, some actors, like those who become politicians or senior civil servants, may be especially likely to act in self-interested ways. But as a general rule, I think there are many motives that are in play in the general population. Now, the important thing, though, is that people have goals which they understand better than others and which they want to be able to pursue in their own ways. That doesn't mean that the purpose of their action is benefiting themselves. Their interests are their interests, but they're not necessarily interests in their own success, welfare, well-being. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. To use a simple way of putting the matter, an interest of the self is not necessarily an interest in the self.